Somewhere in Arizona, there are entire towns where the police blotter is basically empty, and a three-bedroom house costs less than a used pickup in Los Angeles. And the real estate industry would very much prefer you keep scrolling. This video is the list they don't put in the glossy brochures. 12 small Arizona towns where the crime rate is almost a rounding error, and the housing is still somehow affordable. No gated golf communities, no million-dollar desert mansions, no influencers pretending a shack is a paradise. Just real towns where real people live safe, quiet lives without setting their bank accounts on fire. We're talking about a town named after two guys, not the weather. A former copper city carved into the side of a mountain. A place with the only domed high school football stadium in America, sitting right next to the third largest volcanic field on the entire continent. And a town that exists today because one man got very lucky at a card table in the 1870s. Yeah, it gets weird. Subscribe now or spend the rest of your life paying a mortgage the size of a small nation's debt. Your call. Let's count them down, starting near the bottom. Number 12. Willcox. Out in the southeast corner of the state, about 90 minutes from Tucson, there's a dusty little town of around 3,000 people that most Arizonans have never bothered to visit. Big mistake. Willcox sits at over 4,000 feet in the high desert, surrounded by rolling farmland, cattle country, wide empty skies, and something you would absolutely not expect out here. Vineyards. Rows and rows of them, stretching toward the mountains like somebody airlifted a chunk of Tuscany into the Arizona scrubland. Because Willcox is quietly the wine capital of Arizona. The Willcox growing region holds more than 2/3 of the entire state's planted grapevines and produces the large majority of Arizona's wine grapes. So while everyone's out there fighting over overpriced Napa Valley real estate and taking out second mortgages for the privilege, there are people in Willcox buying whole houses for pocket change and pressing their own Malbec in the garage. It's also a serious pistachio and farming town, so the land out here actually works for a living, and the folks who own it tend to stick around for generations. And the homes really are cheap. We're talking a median home price hovering around $190,000, which in the current housing market feels like a printing error. You can buy an entire house in Willcox for what most cities charge just for a down payment. Let that number sit with you for a second while your rent notification buzzes in your pocket. Now, I promised you dark honesty, so here's the catch. And Willcox is the one town on this list where I really want you to read the crime stats before you fall in love. Violent crime is low, which is great, but property crime runs a bit above the state average. So this is not a leave your front door wide open and your keys in the truck kind of place. It's cheap, it's charming, it's got wine trails and pistachio orchards for days, and it's a genuinely tempting entry point into Arizona living. Just do your homework, get a camera for the porch, and go in with your eyes open. The town throws a big annual wine festival and a bird-watching celebration around the nearby Willcox Playa, where thousands of sandhill cranes stop over every winter, so there's actually more going on here than the empty highway would ever suggest. If you're finding this useful so far, go ahead and hit that like button, because it genuinely helps these hidden little towns reach more people who are quietly desperate to escape their overpriced cities. Number 11. Camp Verde. Roughly halfway between Phoenix and Flagstaff, tucked into the green ribbon of the Verde Valley, sits Camp Verde. Population about 12,000. And this one is genuinely beautiful in a way that catches people off guard. Actual flowing water in Arizona, which around here counts as a minor miracle worth telling your grandchildren about. The Verde River runs right through the middle of town, lined with towering cottonwood trees, cattle ranches, and pockets of green that make you forget you're in the desert at all. And just up the road, you've got Montezuma Castle National Monument, a 1,000-year-old cliff dwelling built into a sheer limestone wall by the Snagwa people, one of the best preserved ancient structures in North America. The name is completely wrong, by the way. It has nothing to do with Montezuma. Early settlers just guessed, and the wrong name stuck for a couple hundred years. Very Arizona of them. For a place this scenic, the violent crime rate is genuinely low, sitting comfortably under the national average. That's the good news, and it's real good news. The honest note is that property crime here grades out a little rough, so like Willcox, this is a get yourself a doorbell camera town, rather than a sleep with the windows open all summer town. Nothing alarming, just worth knowing before you sign anything. Housing is where it gets interesting. A few years ago, Camp Verde was one of the flat-out best deals in the entire state. The kind of secret that real estate nerds whispered about at parties. Prices have been climbing since then, and now the median lands somewhere between 260,000 and the high 300s depending on which source you trust and how new the listings are. Still a bargain compared to Phoenix, and still an absolute steal compared to Sedona, which is only about half an hour up the road. Basically, you get Sedona's jaw-dropping red rock scenery and clean air without Sedona's how on earth is a two-bedroom cottage $4 million pricing. That is not a bad trade at all. Number 10. Bisbee. Okay, this one is my personal favorite on the entire list, and it's easily the weirdest, so buckle up. Down near the Mexican border, carved impossibly into the steep sides of the Mule Mountains, there's an old copper mining boomtown called Bisbee. 100 years ago, this was one of the richest and most cultured cities anywhere between St. Louis and San Francisco. Grand hotels, an opera house, electric streetlights before most of the country had them, and a mine that pulled billions of dollars in copper out of the ground. Then the copper ran out, the mining money packed up and left, and the town should have died like 1,000 other boomtowns did across the West. Instead, something strange happened. Artists moved in. Hippies, painters, writers, and dropouts who wanted cheap rent and clean mountain air took over the abandoned Victorian houses for almost nothing, and Bisbee quietly reinvented itself into something nobody planned. Today, Bisbee is a mile-high artist colony of about 5,000 people, and it looks like nowhere else in Arizona, or honestly, anywhere else in America. Victorian houses stacked up brutally steep hillsides, staircases instead of roads, winding alleys, galleries, coffee shops, ghost tours, and a proudly eccentric population that fled the big cities decades ago and never once looked back. Because it sits at 5,500 feet, it stays genuinely cool while the rest of Arizona is actively trying to end you with triple-digit heat. Home prices run around $245,000, and you can rent here for a fraction of what a big city charges for a shoebox with no windows. Now, I'll be straight with you on safety because that's the whole point of this channel. Bisbee's crime picture is a little debated. Some trackers call it very safe, others put it middle of the pack so it is not a statistically pristine, spotless small town. But for an artsy, walkable, mile-high former mining city carved into a mountain, packed with history and character and cheaper than almost anywhere comparable, it is about as safe as it is charming. And it is deeply, wonderfully charming. Where else can you buy a 100-year-old miner's cottage on a hillside, walk to a jazz bar, and still pay less than a studio apartment costs back in the city you're trying to leave? Number 9. Sierra Vista. Back over in Cochise County, about 75 minutes from Tucson, Sierra Vista is the biggest place on this list, with a population north of 40,000. So yes, it stretches the definition of small town a little. But it earns its spot for one simple reason. It might be the best raw value in the entire state. This is a military town built up around Fort Huachuca, one of the Army's oldest continuously active posts, with a history stretching all the way back to the days of the frontier cavalry chasing Geronimo across these very hills. That military anchor gives Sierra Vista something a lot of tiny towns just don't have. Stability, a steady economy, steady jobs, and a steady flow of people that keeps the whole place from drying up and blowing away. It sits at 4,600 feet, so the climate is genuinely pleasant, with mild summers by Arizona standards, and it's earned the delightful nickname Hummingbird Capital of the United States, thanks to the absurd number of species that migrate through every year. Serious birdwatchers travel across the entire country just to stand in the canyons here with binoculars. The cost of living is one of the lowest in all of Arizona, and the median home price sits somewhere in the 270s to right around $300,000 range. For a full-service city with real jobs, real hospitals, real grocery stores, and an actual movie theater, that is remarkable value. Crime is a genuine mixed bag, safer than the Arizona average by some measures, and just average by others, so it's not a fortress. But when you weigh the price, the amenities, the climate, and the stability all together, Sierra Vista is a serious contender for anyone who wants small-town affordability without the small-town isolation and boredom that usually comes with it. It's also increasingly popular with remote workers and retirees who want mild weather, cheap housing, and a real town around them. All without the traffic and price tags of Tucson just down the highway. Number 8. Dewey-Humboldt. Now we really start getting into the genuinely quiet, genuinely safe stuff. Dewey-Humboldt is a rural town of about 4,500 people, stitched together from two old mining and farming settlements, sitting about 85 miles north of Phoenix in the high desert near Prescott. And by high desert near Prescott, I mean you get the cooler elevation, the clean air, and the wide open elbow room, without paying Prescott's increasingly painful and rapidly climbing prices. This is where the safety numbers start reading like something straight out of a relocation brochure. Crime here is lower than roughly two-thirds of communities in the entire country, and it pulls strong safety grades, especially for property crime, which is the category that actually touches your daily life. Translation for you. People here mostly worry about javelinas rearranging the garden and the occasional stubborn rattlesnake sunning itself on the driveway, not somebody kicking in the back door at 2 in the morning. Home prices swing a bit depending on who's doing the counting, from around $217,000 on the low end up into the low 300s, so there are real deals to be found if you're patient and willing to watch the market for a few months. It's also home to Mortimer Farms, a big agritourism spot where families pour in for pumpkin patches, hay rides, corn mazes, and pick your own everything, which honestly tells you basically everything you need to know about the vibe here. This is a slow, safe, deeply rural life, sitting about 90 minutes from a major airport, close enough to Prescott for a nice dinner, but far enough out that your nearest neighbor might be a horse. If that's the dream you keep quietly scrolling toward at midnight, this is exactly your kind of place. And if it is, do future you one small favor and subscribe, because we hunt down towns exactly like this one every single week. Number 7. St. John's. Way out in the northeast, near the New Mexico line, the county seat of Apache County is a little town of about 3,400 people called St. John's. It sits at over 5,700 feet along the Little Colorado River, and it holds the crown for possibly the best pure affordability on this entire list. We're talking a median home price that lands somewhere around $215,000 to $230,000, with older figures dipping even lower than that. And the crime here is low. This is a small, tight-knit, high-desert town where everybody knows everybody's business, everybody's dog, and everybody's grandmother, and the locals have literally nicknamed it the town of friendly neighbors. That's not a marketing slogan somebody cooked up in an office. That's just genuinely what they call the place. Here's the fun part, and it's a good one. St. John's exists partly because of a poker game. The story goes that founder Solomon Barth won the money he used to establish his ranch right here in an 1870s card game. So the entire county seat traces its roots back to one very, very good night at the table. Somewhere out there is an alternate timeline where he drew a bad hand, and this town simply never happened. It's also the hometown of the Udall family, one of the most influential political dynasties in the entire American West, which is not bad at all for a town most people couldn't find on a map, with a magnifying glass and clear written instructions. It's remote, no question about it, and you'll be driving a while for a big shopping trip. Winters up here get properly cold and windy, so this isn't the Sunbelt fantasy some people move to Arizona chasing. But if you want cheap land, enormous open skies, real four-season weather, and a genuine slow-paced high desert life where your money stretches like taffy, St. John's absolutely delivers the goods, and it does it for less money than almost anywhere else in the state. Number 6. Clarkdale. Back in the Verde Valley, right next door to the wine town of Cottonwood, there's a small town of a few thousand people called Clarkdale that has one of the most spotless crime records in the entire state. Some safety rankings put Clarkdale at or near the very top of Arizona for lowest violent crime rate, with figures so low they almost feel made up. I'll flag honestly that not every source agrees perfectly on this, but the overall picture here is genuinely, impressively safe by any measure. What makes Clarkdale fascinating is that it didn't just grow randomly and messily like most old towns did. It was designed. Back in 1912, a copper baron built the whole town from scratch as a planned community for the workers at his massive smelter. Wide, orderly streets, a proper town square, real infrastructure, sewers, parks, all of it laid out on purpose by actual engineers. So unlike most old mining towns that sprawled out into a chaotic, lawless mess, Clarkdale feels calm and intentional, because it literally was. It's often called Arizona's first true company town, and a century later that thoughtful set of bones still shows in how pleasant it is to walk around. Today it's the departure point for the Verde Canyon Railroad, a stunning scenic train ride that winds through a red rock canyon you cannot reach any other way. No roads, no cars, just the rails and the river and the eagles overhead. And it sits right in the heart of Arizona wine country, so vineyards and tasting rooms are just minutes away. Home prices here run higher than the remote eastern towns, landing you above the Snowflakes and St. John's of the world, but still comfortably below Sedona, which is a short and gorgeous drive away. For a safe, walkable, purpose-built town wrapped in vineyards and canyon scenery, Clarkdale is a quietly excellent choice that punches well above its size. Number 5. Springerville and Eagar. I'm generously giving you two towns for the price of one right here because these White Mountains twins basically function as a single stitched-together community. Springerville has about 2,000 people, Eagar has around 4,000, and together they sit in a stunning high valley called Round Valley at nearly 7,000 feet. This is not the cactus and sand Arizona you're picturing in your head right now. This is thick ponderosa pine forests, cold, snowy winters with actual sledding and shoveling, and cool green summers where you might genuinely need a jacket at night in the middle of July. People flat out don't believe this part of Arizona exists until they see it with their own eyes. And the crime is almost comically low. In Eagar, the violent crime rate is a tiny fraction of the national average. This is the kind of place where the town's biggest ongoing security concern is a herd of elk deciding to cross the road during your morning commute, or a black bear getting into somebody's unsecured trash cans overnight. Now for the weird facts, because these two absolutely deliver the goods. Springerville sits inside the Springerville Volcanic Field, which is made up of over 400 separate volcanic vents spread across more than 1,000 square miles, making it the third largest volcanic field in the entire continental United States. You are, technically speaking, living right on top of geological history. And over in Eagar, the local high school plays its football games inside the Round Valley Endsphere, a giant domed stadium that opened in the early 90s and is, no exaggeration whatsoever, the only domed high school football stadium in all of America. A tiny mountain town of a few thousand people built themselves a full indoor stadium because the mountain weather was too wild and unpredictable to reliably play outside. Absolute legends. No notes. Housing? Springerville runs around $234,000, and Eagar sits around $280,000. For genuine four-season mountain living, right next to Sunrise Park Ski Resort, with fishing lakes and hiking trails in every single direction, that is a shockingly, almost suspiciously good deal. Alright, so here's where things get really good, because these last four towns are the cleanest, most convincing combinations of cheap and safe on the entire list. This is the good stuff you came for. Number 4. Taylor. Up in the White Mountains region of Navajo County, at about 5,600 feet, there's a quiet ranching town of around 4,000 people called Taylor. And you basically cannot talk about Taylor without immediately talking about its far more famous twin, which is coming up in just a second, because the two towns sit so close together that they actually share a single police department between them. And that shared department is doing outstanding work, by the way. On a cost of crime basis, Taylor comes in safer than the Arizona state average, which, for a rural town of this size, is exactly the kind of number you want to see before you rent a moving truck. This is Mormon heritage country, settled generations ago by pioneer families, and it still carries that quiet, orderly, everybody waves at everybody. Everybody eats at the same diner feel that so many towns across America have completely lost to time. Home prices in Taylor generally sit in the mid-200,000s, though a surprisingly hot local market has pushed some recent sales noticeably higher. So it's genuinely worth watching month to month if you're serious. What you're actually buying here is space and stillness. High desert ranchland, big shady cottonwood trees, an unhurried pace of life, and a real tangible sense that your neighbors would absolutely notice and come knocking if something ever seemed wrong at your place. It's the kind of town where kids still ride their bikes around the neighborhood until the streetlights flicker on, which sounds like a greeting card cliche right up until you actually visit a place where it's just quietly, undeniably true, and you realize you'd forgotten towns like this still existed at all. Number 3. Snowflake. And here, finally, is Taylor's famous twin. Now, before your brain paints a picture of some frozen winter wonderland with icicles everywhere, let me go ahead and ruin it for you completely. Snowflake has nothing whatsoever to do with snow. The town is named after two Mormon pioneers who founded it together, a man named Erastus Snow and a man named William Flake. Snow plus Flake equals Snowflake. It is, hands down, the greatest town name origin story in all of Arizona. And the best part is that it's 100% real. Nobody's pulling your leg on this one. Snowflake sits at about 5,600 feet with a population of around 6,000, and the crime here is roughly cut in half compared to the national average. This is a safe, family-driven, deeply rooted community with a beautifully preserved historic pioneer downtown that genuinely looks like the set of a Western film, just minus the shootouts and the tumbleweeds. The affordability, though, is the real headline that keeps people moving here year after year. The median home value in Snowflake has run anywhere from the high 160s up to around $260,000 depending on the year and the source, with a cost of living that sits comfortably below the national average across the board. So you're getting a safe, established, historic, high desert town with real roots and real community spirit for a price that makes big city buyers physically wince and quietly close their laptops in defeat. Snowflake is the kind of place people move to and then just quietly stop complaining about their lives. There are horse properties, quiet cul-de-sacs, and a main street that hasn't sold its soul to a single chain restaurant. If that sounds like the reset button you've been searching for, consider this your official sign to look it up tonight. Number 2. Thatcher. Down in the Gila Valley in southeastern Arizona, sitting beneath the absolutely towering 10,000-foot peak of Mount Graham, there's a college town of about 5,000 people called Thatcher. And this one consistently ranks among the very safest places in the entire state year after year after year. We're talking a violent crime rate that lands in the low double digits per 100,000 people, with 0 murders showing up in the data, which is exactly the kind of jaw-dropping statistic that makes this whole video worth making in the first place. Thatcher is home to Eastern Arizona College, and that campus gives this little farming town a steady, youthful, well-maintained energy that a lot of small rural towns slowly lose as their populations age out and their kids move away. It's a Mormon-founded agricultural community, tidy and green and tree-lined, with the dramatic Pinaleño Mountains rising up right behind it like a painted movie backdrop. Now, here's a detail that matters more than most people realize when they're comparing towns. The property taxes here are genuinely low, running well under 0.5% of a home's value. And over the span of a 30-year mortgage, that difference is real. Serious money staying right in your pocket instead of quietly disappearing every year. Home prices themselves are a little harder to pin down, with estimates ranging from the low 200s up toward the high 300s, depending on the source and the season. But even at the very top of that range, you are getting one of Arizona's safest towns, with a college, a mountain backdrop, artesian-fed valley farmland, and small-town costs. Thatcher is the living definition of a place that has quietly figured the whole thing out while nobody else was watching. And that brings us, at long last, all the way to number 1. Number 1. Chino Valley. If you only remember one single town from this entire video, make it this one, and maybe even write it down somewhere. About an hour and a half north of Phoenix, sitting right next to Prescott, is Chino Valley. Population around 14,000. And it has a legitimate, defensible claim to being the single safest town in all of Arizona. The numbers here are the whole reason it takes the top spot, and they are outstanding. Chino Valley routinely posts one of the lowest property crime rates in the entire state, alongside a violent crime rate that's a tiny fraction of the national average, plus multiple years on record with 0 murders whatsoever. Some safety analysts have calculated that the yearly cost of crime per resident here sits well below both the state and the national average. In plain, everyday English, this is about as safe as an American town realistically gets, without building a wall around the whole thing. And the best part is that it's not some far-flung, isolated outpost where you'd have to drive 2 hours just for a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. Chino Valley sits in beautiful high grassland at around 4,700 feet, So it stays noticeably cooler than the Phoenix furnace all summer, and it's just up the road from Prescott, meaning you get restaurants, hospitals, shopping, and a regional airport all within an easy reach. Historically, this area sits near the site of old Fort Whipple and Arizona's very first territorial capital, so there's genuine frontier history baked right into the ground beneath your feet. It's proud horse country, wide and open and green in the spring, the kind of place where people actually have a couple of acres and a barn and put them to real everyday use. The one honest caveat, and there's always one on this channel, is the price. Chino Valley is popular, and popularity always costs money in the end, so home values here run higher than the remote eastern towns, generally landing in the low to mid 300,000s, with some sources pushing a bit higher than that. But you are paying for the genuine best of both worlds. Big city safety statistics wrapped in small town quality of life, in a location close enough to a real city that you never once feel stranded or stuck out in the middle of nowhere. You get the frontier openness and the horse trails and the quiet, but you also get a Costco run and an emergency room within a comfortable drive, which is the exact balance most people say they want and almost never actually find. For the total combination of safe, still affordable, and genuinely livable, Chino Valley is the complete package, and a deeply deserving number one. So there they are, 12 small Arizona towns where the crime rate barely even registers on the charts, and a real, honest-to-goodness home still costs less than a fancy 3-car garage in California. If I personally had to plan an actual escape and pack the truck tomorrow morning, I'd start with the clean, cheap, high country picks. Snowflake, Thatcher, Taylor, and St. John's for pure, unbeatable value and safety. And I'd put Chino Valley right at the top of the short list for anyone who wants the absolute safest possible numbers, while still staying close to a real, functioning city with an airport and a hospital. But every single one of these places is a real, breathing, functioning town where your money stretches further and your blood pressure quietly drifts back down to something like normal. Not a fantasy, not a heavily filtered photo, not a scam waiting to happen. The only thing standing between you and a calmer, cheaper, safer life is the simple decision to actually start looking somewhere brand new. If this video just saved you from another entire decade of overpriced big city rent, do me one tiny favor on your way out the door. Subscribe because I go hunting for these hidden affordable towns every single week all across America, and the next list I make might just have your future hometown sitting right there on it. Now go check your bank account, pull up a map of Arizona, drop a few pins on the towns you liked, and start actually dreaming about it for real. Because the version of your life where rent doesn't eat you alive is a lot closer than you think. I'll see you in the next one.